I'm going to introduce kind of what happened as a brief summary, because I've spent a lot of time on Haiti since the earthquake, and kind of understanding the magnitude of the thing is going to be very useful. And then get into some of the technical issues that we've had to deal with. I think it's a pretty interesting space, just from a raw technical point of view, and then of course it's for a humanitarian purpose that we don't always get to have. When you're helping users, you're helping users, but when you're helping people out of the rubble, it feels a little different. Just a little background. I worked on web indexing, system administration for a few years at Google, so I'm definitely like a big back-end systems guy, and I like really difficult systematic grungy problems. And so when I saw what was going on at Haiti, that was it was pretty easy for me to volunteer for that and say I think there's going to be some work here to do. So let's get into it. Anybody an expert on Haiti? I've run into a couple just randomly recently because it's close, right? So sometimes people have family down there, but if you don't know, it's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere for the quota, and it's kind of it's like Ethiopia, right? Like remember the '80s, you'd see the bad commercials and everything, the kids and everything. That's Haiti. They've had just severe problems for a long time. It has a lot to do with their history, the history of kind of a slave colony that revolted, and so it became not well liked by the rest of the slave-owning Western powers, and so they've been kind of not friendly. People haven't been very friendly with them for the past couple hundred years, so they've never been in a good state. And then an earthquake hits them that is among the 5 deadliest in history and counting at this point. Somewhere between 200 and 300,000 at this point. People killed, equivalent number injured, and 1 million homeless. These are all extremely rough numbers. This is mostly based off of a presentation I gave right after kind of the peak of the work we were doing a few weeks ago. So the numbers are pretty good, but they're still changing quickly. And Haiti itself is mainly Port-au-Prince. There's not a lot else going on in the country. It's very centralized around the capital city, and it's a pretty big city. It's like I think about 2 or 3 times the size of DC. It goes into DC very well. And the picture there is one picture, but basically any of the pictures you saw on the news they weren't selected and picked out from like areas that were particularly hard hit. It was just everything was destroyed. The entire city, kind of biblical proportions. The response by all accounts has been nothing like this has been seen before. All the Google went in, and I was there as on a kind of fact-finding group. Like we did an initial bit of work to help track missing people. We linked it from our homepage, and I'll talk more about that later. But the big involvement came after that, and seeing that there was a lot of information problems, we got pulled into it. State Department asked Google to kind of get involved and help coordinate a bit, and so we decided to send down a small team. And so I went down for 5 days with we had a small team of 5 people, and we talked with people there and trying to say, like, if you've got a break in the action, like at the camp at night, don't let us stop what you're doing, but we would like to hear anything you're doing and your information problems. And they would tell us, these are guys who are, they've been doing crisis years around the world for 30, 40 years, grizzled veterans, and they're like, Haiti is like nothing they'd ever seen. These are guys who have been the worst war-torn areas of Africa, East Asia after the tsunami. Haiti's its own thing. So everyone turned out. And critically, I think the U.S. got in the game and enabled the kind of backbone of the logistics effort. And Obama is definitely to be commended for that. And I think as a country, we probably learned a lot after Katrina that kind of sowed the seeds for that. If you're not familiar with how these things work, the U.S. military generally doesn't get involved. It would be USAID. USAID will pull in the U.S. military if need be, but it's typically more the United Nations and a group called OCHA, crisis, something is probably in French, I don't know. But they're the first responders for the UN. And later on, the UNDP, UN Development Program, comes in to kind of do reconstruction. But OCHA are like 24/7 on-the-ground responders. They have a cluster system where they'll do like health and water and sanitation, and they'll break it into groups, and they bring in like all the other organizations you've heard about, like Save the Children or World Food Organization, all get brought in as leads of the clusters that OCHA kind of runs in general. So that's kind of how all the NGOs get together to respond to large events like this. The span, something like the tsunami, 9/11, Katrina, they're huge disasters, but the shape of it can kind of depend on the disaster. Apparently, there's differences between earthquakes and mudslides and these kind of things. But within a few weeks, you pretty much are dealing with the main problems, and you're going to be wrapping it up within a month or two. Apparently, this is all what I've heard. But for Haiti, not only is the beginning problematic for quite a long time, but then the construction effort reconstruction effort is estimated on the decades level. And there was a statistic I heard that the UN, when a disaster happens, a large-scale disaster happens, they do an economic analysis, and they have this metric that compares the extent of the disaster, like the cost, to the GDP of the country. And Haiti was the first one where the disaster cost exceeded the annual GDP of the country. So it's 120% of annual GDP is the estimated cost. So we're in a region of like $10 to $20 billion of asked for assistance. And it's starting to come in. There is very good indicators as far as that goes. So, moving on to the technical point of the talk. This will be the rest of the talk here, our technical talk. So here's internet traffic. I'm not very clear on the sources of this. This came through Google Knock, and it was shared, I guess, BGP, not BGP, shared route view indicators from some of our peers. Randy Neals, I don't know if you guys have heard of him in Google networking. This is very well connected in the ISP community. And there was one of the great things about Haiti is everybody just threw in and said, let's do what we can in any way we can. So there's a lot of good data sharing right off the bat. And so traffic, ingress, egress traffic was reported throughout and shared throughout. And you see here, like I said, I'm not sure the source. I don't know what the metric on the left-hand side is. It may have been obfuscated. But you see a relative fall-off. You have your diurnal interday traffic on the left, and then the earthquake hits, and these are days along the bottom. I don't know if you can see that. And traffic completely falls off. Now you might think, okay, well, the country got destroyed, and it's a bad earthquake, and this is one of the indicators. But why did it actually? Why did the connections? Why did the traffic go down? The initial idea was that there was actual infrastructure damage. And indeed, it was known that the cable, the one oceanic cable going into Haiti was immediately went non-operational. However, it wasn't really being used yet. It was just being, it had recently been lit and wasn't really plugged into the commercial market locally. So it wasn't the basis for commercial traffic. What was actually happening was that overland microwave links through Dominican Republic had been and still were the main source of bandwidth into Haiti. And it turned out that they all were up and fine. And it quickly became clear that what would happen when the earthquake hit was that all the power and homes and everything had gone away, so the actual users had gone away. And it was not actually an infrastructure problem with the connectivity. The one ISP that was kind of up in the richer area where some of the more well-built homes, probably the top end of the internet market was, Access Haiti, represents most of the traffic here. It came back within, this is 11 to 21 of January. They're back up to roughly 50% levels within a week or two. So this is pretty remarkable. This did not happen in Chile, for instance. I think, yeah, the internet basically worked. It's a real testament to the architecture, and it's why the thing was designed the way it was in the first place, right? It withstood an event that most other systems in the country did not. And people were back up and using it religiously within a few days. The power and oceanic cable were cut. There were routing problems. There was a lot of instability with the peering traffic. That was something that the stateside community and international community jumped in with and helped immediately. That's a good thing. If you know any networking people after a disaster, please call them up and say, hey, hands-on actually helps you. You know, if you've got looking glasses from your piece of the network or something like that, you may know something that somebody else does. So jump on Twitter, find the hashtag that matters, and start telling people what you can see. Right? Other things that worked. SMS and WiMAX. SMS is amazing, and recently coming into .org, I'm finding out that this is really the backbone of communications in the developing world. I'm starting to learn up on the GSM stack, and I recently kind of appreciate the arguments that SMS ought to be free. It's built into the lower signaling paths in GSM. So to even have a phone link to be able to do voice, you've already established that that works for GSM or for SMS. There are some problems once it hits local carriers. There's some kind of not tunneling protocols. There's special peering relationships that have to be set up between boxes at a local telco with ISPs upstream to actually be able to exchange SMS traffic. And then it's kind of an arcane protocol with lots of extensions for like GeoDis and there's a broadcast or whatever. It's pretty complex. That would be another great thing for people to get involved with and fix is the sorry state of SMS. But overall, totally available. In the refugee camp that we stayed near, literally there was food, shark, and cell phones for sale. You know, that's just, it is the backbone, and everyone there understood. Haitians were remarkably resilient to everything. I think I was in New York for 9/11, and the psychological damage was obviously huge, but they went through something mind-numbingly larger, and I think overall they were just incredibly resilient, and able kind of to get back to life in a way that was surprising everybody who was coming there. Just a shock. Cell data also worked, GPRS and Edge, and WiMAX. Surprisingly, there is WiMAX, widespread WiMAX deployment in Haiti. So something that will not be coming to New York probably for, you know, maybe in the coming decade. Who knows? I mean, the only other place I've seen it is Palo Alto, and I'm sure it's a couple other places these days. But it was great. You just got a little wireless modem. You put it down on the ground, positioned it, and all of a sudden you're watching YouTube in the middle of it was totally great. And so that's a really interesting lesson, and that's one of the things that didn't work. I think I pointed that out somewhere. Oh yeah, the second point here is that it's assumed in a disaster that nothing works. And that's probably a safe assumption, but it has some negative effects. People wait for their VSATs to come in. VSATs are just smaller, portable, satellite-based communication equipment. And so you have a gap there where you aren't communicating, where literally, if you would have walked, you know, or taken your Jeep a mile down the road, you could have gone to Access Haiti, picked out a brochure, and said, I would like this awesome 3 megabits a second WiMAX router, and you're up and going. Now, it's not all that clean. You do need a car battery and an inverter and a Wi-Fi hotspot to connect to that. But that's not bad if you think about it. Those are pretty off-the-shelf technologies. So WiMAX is not bad. Voice network, totally gone. And that's something probably too where better deployment of like Skype, Google Voice, things like that would make a more significant difference if people would be more available to roll those out. Cloud computing does not work in the developing world. It's something that we should be very mindful of in our internet architectures, that most of what we're headed towards is really kind of wrecking the scenario for functionality there. You guys remember WAP, the feature phone, dumb phone, form creator protocol? That's what works there. And asynchronous use, since things fail kind of partially, there's a lot of brownout scenarios and everything's slow, you really need to be thinking about small updates, occasionally getting through It's like a network with a. The only thing I've really experienced stateside is when we've had like dusty routers or switches in a network room, and you get like you really do get like 70% package delivery or something like that, right? Like we're not familiar with that with new bright and shiny equipment, but that's more of the state of things in these old stacks. Another focus area, collaboration. So this is where I got in, so I have a little bit more of a story to tell here. There was an immediate concern. There's a large diaspora population in the United States of Haitians, and a lot of people wanting to know about their family members. So immediately, many sites go up on New York Times, CNN, local newspapers. I think there was 10 Canadian newspapers that had all started some instance of some tool that they had on their websites to track missing people. That immediately then. It turns out there was this standard that had got established after 9/11 and Katrina called PFIF by a guy who's now working at Google, and it's a little XML exchange format for missing person information. And there was this thread going around within the first couple of days. It's IETF track standard. It's really interesting. There was this thread going around in the first couple of days between Microsoft, Yahoo, and Google, and a few others kind of in the more political community. Hey. And there's people who have worked together from Katrina saying, hey, we should really use this PFIF thing this time around, like ASAP. Apparently in Katrina, it happened after a few weeks. People started to do this data exchange, Red Cross, and folks like that. Databases would be exported in bulk in PFIF, and it would make its way around. But since the standard existed, and there was previous experience with it, we tried to stand up an app quickly using it, and I didn't mention one of the things that works here, but so we did this on top of App Engine, and got it. It was kind of a 24/7 effort with a bunch of Googlers doing 20% time. We get one day a week to kind of work on what we want. So we put up this app, and it's on the right. It's really simple. There isn't much to it. It's just a form. It allows basically the same functionality as any of the other sites. But what we also had was this developer link at the bottom of the page, and you go there and you see all about the PFIF format and web service APIs to access it, and it wasn't long then before we linked in with the other groups that put up their own missing person sites. And that had a really nice effect that if you were wondering about your mom or something in Haiti, and you were checking sites, you no longer had to worry for the big sites, or increasingly almost any site, if they had the most recent information, because then everybody had the same information, because we're all federated, kind of like news, RSS, and atom feeds are on the back end. Everyone was federated. It's a really great example of kind of how the usual stack that we're used to making consumer apps for turns into one of these kind of real life-saving uses. Another thing that is really starting to happen in crisis response is crowdsourced kind of mashup level tools. Ushahidi is this group that was formed around the Kenyan elections a few years ago. A lot of violence was breaking up. The government was trying to upset the elections. They put up a web app to kind of allow violence reports to help get the message out to Western media, European media about what was going on in Kenya. And through now I think this is their 10th instance of the Ushahidi platform, they now have a pretty sophisticated system, use OpenStreetMaps on the left, and a categorical breakdown of incident reports on the right to kind of give a situational awareness to an event. And situational awareness is the name of the game in these things. It's not like getting better and doing the top end of the problem. It's really the easy stuff, just to allow people to understand basically what's going on. So Ushahidi is really cool. If you're an open source developer at all and would like to get involved in any way in crisis response, Ushahidi is probably the best way to put in your time. There's a lot of PHP, Python, and they have just a great little community. There's phone application development, server-side development, and also integration with telco work. These guys had a really interesting story. They would, so we got involved with them through Person Finder, and there would be missing person reports that would get SMS'd into Twitter, or somebody would SMS from Haiti to a family member back home and give some status, and that person would post it on Twitter to their friend group. Now, that, you know, if they're LinkedIn and the whole family's on Twitter, that'd be great. But that's not really the way it was. Everybody realized this. You know, the grandma isn't on Twitter. She would love to know if her daughter's alive. So what people were doing was going through Twitter and doing processing on it and extracting all messages about person status on it that were being posted to Haiti. A lot of hand triage, a lot of volunteers working around the clock. And they would amass these atom feeds of PFIF and send them out to anybody who would get them. Well, they were putting this out kind of in the hope that it would be useful somewhere. They get a call from the U.S. Coast Guard who said to them, hey, we're reading your atom feeds. Please make sure that the best ones go into a feed that you pay particular attention to, because we're calling in your status reports for people who are trapped or you know, some actionable thing happened to responders on the ground. So there was this awesome loop from SMS through to Twitter, through to USHIED, and then back through the Coast Guard to search and rescue teams. That actually, the Coast Guard told them later it was like between 100 and 200 people from those messages were actually saved. This was a total spontaneous effort that wasn't really planned. You know, imagine what could happen if this is a model going forward. These guys are great. Definitely check them out. That's that story, the EMR folks. What also works is ad hoc adaptation with whatever you have. So putting a bunch of people on the ground with a lot of cell phones and paper and cars is basically what was doing all the work in Haiti. So you would see heads of organizations like PIH is this great medical group there. We met Louise Ivers from PIH, and she had a pocket full of phones, like a backpack full of phones, because she's like, you know, that's useful for a couple of reasons. It's like multiple networks. She's got SIMs for each network. If one's busy at once, she can grab another one. So she's like literally having like 3 phone conversations at the same time. If one dies, you know, because of the environmental conditions are so bad, we can take it. That's how this stuff gets done. It's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And then on the ground, that's why this is under collaboration. There's the technically collaboration doesn't work very well. What we're doing on Twitter is what you would really like to see in these situations. But it's such a clean room environment back home, and it has trouble connecting to the on-the-ground operations. And there's generational disconnect as well, where folks don't understand how to use these information systems. We're on, you know, the UN folks and all those, and so they don't really use it. But the crowdsourcing is really starting to make an impact back home. Here's a just dirty list of what doesn't work when it comes to collab. So people set up all these, it's really easy to set up applications these days, and there's a lot of web developers out there. But so you get these little collections of siloed data that people have a hard time sharing. What are the formats? Do you throw a spreadsheet over the fence and hope that somebody knows what you meant when you typed it in a hurry? Nothing works when it comes to collaboration in a disaster, except for Twitter. The U.S. military and UN OSHA were not sharing, they thought they were, but we found out that they were not sharing their daily status reports with each other. And this is 3 weeks into the disaster. And this is terrible because U.S. military said that they have great situational awareness tools. They have a lot of footprints, their footprint on the ground. They have, you know, roving teams, and they're keeping track of security, very tight operation. They have all this stuff like on their own little Google Maps stuff. We saw this, how this works back at their camp. And they're like, oh yeah, we're sharing it. Like, we want to give this information out. It's not a classified operation. We want to give all this out. UN had their own stuff, and they were trying to share it. It wasn't making it. That's kind of the day-to-day work. At a large organizational level, there was an initial rapid assessment that went off and it worked pretty well. But 2 and now 3 months later, large-scale assessments are just starting to come online. So again, there's probably about there's probably a lesson to be learned here about a better role for crowdsourcing as well. That organizations have a hard time reacting quickly. The bigger the organization, the more resources, but also the slower they're going to move. There's a huge amount of politics around this stuff as well. So even when there is information, they'll generally only share it as raw data and no summary or roll-up made available, because that typically includes enough analysis to hang yourself with. So people will want to share analysis if it shows you're doing a good job, but they don't want to share analysis if you're not doing a good job. which is a real problem because almost nobody's doing a good job for a while in these things. And that's how you solve the problem, is by telling people. Government totally out of the loop and dead in this situation. One last focus area, maps. The whole geo stack is probably the best thing that we saw there, and in general, for the developing world, probably one of the easiest ways to bring technology to bear to really improve things. Here's, I think, January 25th imagery of the camp that we stayed near. This is a 50,000 person refugee camp right in the middle of a golf course in Uphill, Haiti. This camp didn't exist before. This was all green grassland. And this imagery, there's about 1,500 of these camps. This is a large one. But this kind of imagery is basically easy to get these days. You call in, there's something called the space charter that gets activated during severe disasters. This happened in China, it happened in Chile, where governments basically call each other and say, hey, if you've got birds overhead, please send us what you have. And it's basically an IP agreement and a security agreement that was made in advance. That once it's activated, it's easy to share this information. Actually, yeah. If you look up GOI in the phone book, they're the commercial provider who gave this. So we get looped in as a commercial provider to this, which is really weird. I'm sure the military has better stuff, but the civilian stuff is good enough. This is 10 centimeter. I can't show it to you in full res in this format, but 10 centimeter imagery within 2 weeks, and it was, I think, meter imagery within 3 days. So I mean, that's really good. This country was almost totally unmapped when it comes to like vector maps, streets, and all this kind of stuff. Unfortunately, it's a real failing. But when the time comes, we can pretty much know it. Once you have good imagery, you can actually start to do automatic analysis of it and extract this kind of orangey color is in the middle is the tent area, and so you can derive areas of coverage for certain things, like show me area of coverage of damaged buildings would be a nice one, right? Because the alternative, which is a very real plan, is send out people on foot to 300,000 sites in Port-au-Prince and have them do structural analysis on paper and things like that. There are some open issues. Just to round that out, KML, if you don't know it and you're into maps or imagery at all, that's what the community revolves around. There's a Google group or Yahoo group called Crisis Mappers, and people just sit there and share this data in the middle of disasters. That's where the Gulf oil stuff comes out first. Anything you see that eventually goes up, it's probably going to come out early in those groups. Since it's a kind of a closed community, there's a lot of load problems, like sharing big imagery. People don't want to just do it willy-nilly. But if you're into that and have resources, that's a good place to go. There's open IP issues that are not great, and there's a kind of an emerging problem of saying, wouldn't it be great if we could have ongoing high-frequency updates for just the camps? And that's not something that satellites are really suited for. The satellite pipeline, not so much the bird's up there, right? But getting the imagery and having the people to post-process, stitch, and all that costs stuff. And so that's not really the best solution for the high-frequency updates. So something more like aerial imagery and commercial providers, or even DIY efforts, bring your own UAV and throw it out, would be totally sufficient for that kind of an issue. So finally, I just wanted to part and say this is kind of a changing time, that the internet and the tools are becoming powerful enough that the communities are enabled, a more complex response by communities instead of just corporations is being enabled. What we really like, in retrospect, this is kind of the holy grail, is something like the census or the Census Class Director in the U.S., which you can find on census.gov. The complete breakdown of the country, all the data that describes your country, all the tables, how many beds are there in the 13th ward of Atlanta, this kind of information. You have it in a steady state in a country like the U.S., but imagine as a disaster happens, your almanac, your statistical information of the country goes away. It becomes all incorrect. So you'd like to have something of the quality of what the Census Bureau has, what the government agencies have, but what we were finding we need is the ability to update it like a wiki. So the community afterwards can basically be given the trust to say, hey, go rebuild your data set that describes your country, or rebuild the tools to another country. And a crucial aspect of that in a disaster is this notion of mobile data entry, mobile communities, and crowdsourcing. So that's what I got. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Any questions?
How do you determine whether a building's damaged?
Through imagery?
Yeah, but I mean, how does it?
How?
Yeah.
So there's auto segmentation algorithms. There's this library called OpenCV that we put that together with. This is running an image clustering algorithm from the OpenCV library. You parameterize it with some guesses about the types of features that you'd be interested in, how wide, basically how much area they cover. And you say look for patterns that kind of cover this kind of profile, and you tweak it around a little bit, and then you get out something that says, is this a good match? And it's pretty good. Then you can start to do stuff like do bounding boxes on it with some geometrical analysis. But basically, you're just looking for repeated pattern types within the image, and saying that it's going to be a supervised process. You would definitely have to label it. This is where KML comes in. With KML, you can say, drop a pin on something. Yeah, drop a pin and say, this is a damaged building, this is not. And if you get a bunch of hands-on, 1,000 examples like that, then you throw it to the image analysis guys. It's feasible. I'm not saying it's easy at this point. We're working on that.
Yeah, I mean, it would be easy to tell if it's totally destroyed, but like
Yes.
Alice, if you looked at it superficially, it looks okay, but then if you took another look at it, you realize that building's going to come down.
Yeah.
And get rid of it.
That would be more of the exception to the rule. Most of the buildings in like this kind of an image, you can see actually a lot of intact roofs. This is nice houses that were up in kind of the Beverly Hills of Port Prince. A lot of intact roofs, but the areas where there are damaged buildings, it's trouble.
Could you use an algorithm like that on aerial photographs of a wilderness area to locate a missing aircraft that might have gone down?
Yeah, actually, I mean, this is all stuff that used to be, Army and spoof oriented, but now, since the high resolution imagery is free and the research methods and computational powers there, generic automatic imagery analysis is starting to happen for all sorts of purposes.
They did that with Fawcett went down. When Steve Fawcett went down in the Southwest, there were the big search.
Oh, right.
I know they found like 4 or 5 other airplanes that they had just
That would be a feasible way. I mean, the satellites, what they have is they have wide area, high res imagery. You just don't get access to it too frequently. So you get a call in one call, and it's going to be your data set for the next month, for a Haiti level disaster. So it's not as practical probably for some.
Yeah, because I know it's incredibly difficult to spot a missing aircraft from the air.
Right.
And whenever you train with stuff like that, they'll show you photographs from the air and say, do you see where the plane is?
Right.
And you're looking for a plane that's buried in the snow that has a white painted tail at the top of the mountain. And you're like, no, I don't see it. And then in the next slide, they have a little red circle. It's like, oh yeah, there it is. It's pretty amazing how a large plane can disappear under a tree.
Yeah. The world's a big place.
Yeah.
They don't look much like airplanes there, for example.
No.
A question about the people finder out. How do I say this? Google often, since I'm inside, I know Google, it's often very difficult or takes a long time to release a new app. How long did it take you to do it? And
Not long.
how did you do it so quickly?
We didn't ask permission.
Rule number 1 of disaster.
That's right. Yeah.
Apologize later.
Yeah, ask for forgiveness. Not permission.
It's easier to
Because
ask
it
for
wasn't
forgiveness
on
than
AppSpot or something, right?
It was.
Oh, it was on AppSpot.
And that was the other thing. It was
Oh,
on
okay.
App Engine, it was on Public App Engine. So we did the whole thing from start to finish as an open source project on App Engine. Actually, so it wasn't open source for the first 2 weeks, but we didn't use our internal code versioning system. We just did it all in Scratch directories internally, shared the code, and then we moved it up to SVN. Yeah, that's the way to do it.
That's the way to do it.
But we had loose, but we weren't gonna go through any official launch process. We had the loose nods, like do what you have to from the execs,
Right.
and so we just, used and abused that power as much as we could.
Rules tend to go out the windows when there's a crisis.
Yeah. When
Well, actually, no, I disagree. I've worked at companies where the executives wouldn't have.
Yeah, I
given a
was
wink
gonna
and a
say,
nod. So that is actually pretty.
it's worth calling out that our execs are supremely cool when it comes to things like this, and they want us to do the right thing quickly and work with others and whatever. So that's what we got a chance to do. I have one prop actually, since I just had a little bit more time. So this is the emergency response guide. That is the official document of USAID. So when you go into the field in Haiti, not in the US is FEMA, right, in domestic, but non-domestic, this is the official guide. And I had this thing, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it too quickly. It's basically like, there's a section on data sharing, and the first bullet point for data sharing in a disaster is use Courier 10 font. It's like there's no like indication of like an emergency protocol or XML or any of this kind of stuff. It's like use Courier 10 font.
So your XML files were all in for your
Yeah, I mean we stuck to the rule book, man.
So, how did, alright, I'm not sure what the question is, but I know that, you know, a lot of sites that you deal with, I don't know if some of the NGO sites or aid sites are like those, but I know just trying to browse on the BlackBerry, you know, to, right here, it can be there with all the job and all the, you know, and all I really want is 2 lines of text.
Yeah.
I have to wait 15 minutes for this thing to figure out what it's doing.
I hear you.
Is there anything that's, you know, that's kind of like an alternate protocol? or something?
WAP.
Yeah.
Well,
That architecture is the right architecture.
yeah.
It's basically, HTML5 has more of this in it, and we're moving towards that. But it's really, I mean, it's not a complex problem. It's basically saying install all the functionality locally
Right.
and just exchange, data update. And when you do that, use deltas, don't do full record exchange, right? And rsync. Think rsync plus local apps. Something that Apple's,
Yeah.
local apps rule, right? And so they don't rule when you're doing really fluid stuff on the web and you're on the cloud.
Trying to pull that,
But when you're down on the ground,
Yeah, all you want to know is just like, that long.
Yeah, and we're looking at it. I mean, they pull it in engineers and they do a lot of work because of Haiti saying you're going to have a unique perspective into where these technologies fail. So think about it, try to fix it. So we're doing what we can, but that is the reality these days. Is what you see makes it completely unworkable.